You'd think a boat tied up at the county marina would be safe from HOA nonsense. But no, Karen, the self-appointed admiral of our homeowners association, came strutting down the dock one morning, a jangling set of so-called master keys swinging in her hand like she was about to raid enemy territory. My boat, my pride and joy, a 30-foot cruiser, was suddenly her next compliance project. She muttered about safety inspections and community standards, as if the Coast Guard had somehow outsourced their authority to her clipboard and attitude. The moment her key scraped my companionway lock, she triggered something she never saw coming, not just my alarm system, but a ripple effect that would bring in uniforms, flashing lights, and federal jurisdiction. By the time the real authorities arrived, Karen's swagger had evaporated into sheer panic. Before I take you through the chaos that followed, drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. When my wife and I first moved into this lakeside neighborhood, I thought I'd finally found a sanctuary, a little slice of peace after years working in high-pressure construction projects. I'm a middle-aged man graying at the temples with a bad knee that likes to remind me of every ladder I ever climbed. All I wanted was to unwind, cast a fishing line off the stern of my boat, and maybe sip a cold one while the sun dipped below the tree line. But peace in an HOA neighborhood is always an endangered species. The trouble began even before we'd fully settled in. The homeowners association here, led by none other than Karen, queen of clipboards, master of bylaws, and destroyer of joy, had a reputation. Neighbors whispered about her like she was some suburban warlord. Folks told me she once fined a guy for having a wind chime that clinked too loudly, and she once tried to ban someone's dog because it barked in non-compliant tones. Ridiculous, absolutely. But they weren't exaggerating. Karen spotted me the day I hauled my boat into the marina slip. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and I was proud as hell. I'd worked for years to get that 30-foot cruiser, a project I restored with my own 2 hands, fresh paint on the hull, new teak trim, even polished brass cleats that gleamed like gold in the sunlight. It wasn't some beat-up skiff. It was a beauty, a floating cabin I could call mine. Karen, however, saw it differently. She marched right up to me, her expression a mix of horror and disgust, like I'd parked a junkyard on the water. This slip, she announced, is part of the community aesthetic. Boats must comply with HOA-approved color schemes. Yours is, frankly, too bold. Too bold. She was referring to the navy blue hull with a white stripe I'd carefully chosen. Apparently only beige and dull gray were acceptable to Her Royal Highness. I smiled politely because I've learned something about people like her. If you fight them too early, they dig in deeper. So I just said, "Good thing the HOA doesn't own the water, huh?" That was the first time I saw her lips tighten like a trap snapping shut. She didn't like being reminded of boundaries, especially legal ones. Over the next few weeks, the harassment continued. Little notes tucked under my windshield wiper, anchor line not HOA approved, emails about dock uniformity with thinly veiled threats about fines. A glossy pamphlet suddenly circulated claiming that boats docked within the community perimeter were subject to aesthetic guidelines. I nearly laughed myself into the lake. The marina was county-leased property. The HOA's bylaws had no teeth out there, but Karen believed otherwise. Saul, the marina manager, was a no-nonsense kind of guy, beard like driftwood, baseball cap permanently stained with salt. He'd been dealing with Karen for years. "She's tried this before," he told me one afternoon as we leaned against the pier railing. "Tried to enforce HOA rules on the water. Didn't work then, won't work now. But she's stubborn. Watch yourself." And then there was June, our neighbor, self-styled local journalist, always with her phone out. She had a knack for catching Karen mid-tantrum and posting it to the neighborhood group chat. Her motto was, "If Karen says it, I record it." Bless her soul, she was a thorn in Karen's side, long before I ever arrived. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew a paper war was brewing. Karen didn't just come at you head-on. She liked to bleed you with paperwork and citations until you begged for mercy. So I decided to play defense. I registered my boat with the Coast Guard as a documented vessel. That little certificate wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a shield. Federal jurisdiction. Suddenly, my cruiser wasn't just a boat, it was a line in the sand. And sure enough, the HOA upped its game. Karen started holding dock beautification committee meetings, rallying volunteers to inspect hazards. They carried clipboards, took photos of hulls, and made snide comments about non-standard ropes. One poor guy got harassed because his cooler wasn't the right shade of tan. The more I ignored them, the angrier Karen got. She couldn't stand that her rules stopped where the shoreline began, and the more she fumed, the more determined she became to cross that invisible line. I upgraded my boat's security system, not just a padlock, but sensors, cameras, and a little trick I'd learned from my Coast Guard auxiliary training, a direct DSC link. If anyone tampered with my hatch, a coded distress ping would shoot out. Not a full mayday, but enough to flag attention. I didn't tell anyone, not even my wife. Let Karen think she was just waging a war of letters and fines. Meanwhile, I was setting a trap she couldn't see. Then came the message in the HOA app. Karen herself posted it. Community members should be aware non-compliant vessels may pose hazards. The HOA reserves the right to inspect boats for safety and standards at any time. She might as well have drawn a bullseye on my cruiser. Neighbors started murmuring, rolling their eyes, but nobody dared challenge her outright. She thrived on fear, but I wasn't afraid. I'd been dealing with inspectors, foremen, and overbearing bosses my whole life. Karen was just another clipboard in a long line of them. And yet, something about the way she bragged, the way she brandished those keys in meetings, sent a chill down my spine. She claimed she had a master key for the dock boxes and slip gates. No one had ever verified it, but she carried them around like trophies, jingling them just loud enough to remind everyone she had access. At first, I dismissed it as theater. Then, late one evening, I caught her on camera, standing at the edge of my slip keys in hand, testing them on other people's hatches. She didn't get inside, but she tried. And that's when I knew this wasn't just drama. It was escalation. That boat was mine, my refuge, my escape. And if Karen thought she could board it with her magic key ring, she was about to learn the hard way that the HOA's reach ended at the waterline. She thought she was the sheriff of the cul-de-sac. But out here there were bigger sheriffs. And they wore uniforms that even Karen couldn't intimidate. I should have known Karen wouldn't stop at petty notes or angry glares. That woman thrived on escalation the way most of us thrive on caffeine. Sure enough, one bright Monday morning, the neighborhood email list lit up with her latest masterpiece, a glossy, full-color pamphlet titled Dock Compliance and Community Safety Standards. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, flipping through the absurd little booklet. The cover featured a stock photo of some pristine yacht anchored in a harbor that looked nothing like our modest county marina. Inside, the bullet points made my blood pressure spike and my laughter bubble up at the same time. According to Karen, every vessel docked in community waters had to meet new rules, hulls painted only in neutral earth tones, deck furniture approved by the HOA committee for uniformity. Anchors, lines, and fenders must not clash with overall dock aesthetics. Inspections could be carried out at any time by authorized HOA representatives with master key access. Authorized representatives, master key access. She actually put it in writing. I nearly spit out my coffee. Not only was she inventing rules out of thin air, she was trying to extend her dominion onto property the HOA didn't even own. The marina lease was with the county. The HOA had no jurisdiction over those slips. But to Karen, legal lines were just obstacles waiting to be bulldozed. I decided it was time to counterpunch. I pulled out my boat's documentation official embossed paperwork from the U.S. Coast Guard. That certificate was my golden shield. A federally documented vessel wasn't just a hobby toy, it was recognized under maritime law. Karen's HOA pamphlet held less authority than a grocery store coupon in comparison. Later that week, I walked down to the marina office, pamphlet in hand. Saul looked up from his desk, grunted, and shook his head before I even said a word. "Yeah, I've seen it," he muttered. "She dropped off a stack yesterday. Told me to distribute them to all slip renters. I told her the trash bin was over there." He pointed to a dented can in the corner. I chuckled. "She's really pushing this master key thing, huh?" Saul leaned back in his chair, his weathered cap shading his eyes. "Buddy, she doesn't have a master key. Not for these slips. Keys are issued by the county. Each boat owner's got their own. If she's got a set, it's homemade, or worse, she's been tampering." That sent a chill down my spine. Karen wasn't just blowing smoke, she was dangerous. I decided to escalate quietly. I invested in more security. My cameras now covered every angle of my slip, infrared ready. I installed a magnetic sensor on the hatch and linked it to my boat's DSC system. For anyone else, that was overkill. For me, it was insurance. If Karen crossed the line, I'd have proof alarms and, most importantly, a direct call for backup that didn't care one bit about HOA politics. Meanwhile, the neighborhood app started buzzing with Karen's propaganda. She wrote long, self-righteous posts about dangerous nautical hazards and non-compliant vessels threatening property values. She sprinkled in dramatic language about tragedies waiting to happen if the HOA didn't act. One message stood out: effective immediately, the HOA reserves the right to conduct surprise inspections of marina slips for community safety. Surprise inspections. She was escalating from nuisance to threat. Neighbors rolled their eyes in private, but in public, most kept quiet. Karen wielded power like a cudgel. She had a loyal faction of rule worshippers, the types who polished their mailboxes twice a week and tattled on kids for riding bikes too fast. Those folks cheered her on parroting lines about safety and uniformity, but not everyone was on her side. June Ever, the documentarian, uploaded a video compilation clips of Karen scolding people about recycling bins, yelling at a teenager for fishing off the dock, and even measuring the length of a neighbor's lawn with a tape measure. The video ended with Karen declaring the HOA has authority everywhere, whether people like it or not. The group chat exploded with memes. My personal favorite was someone photoshopping Karen onto a pirate ship wielding a broom like a cutlass. Still, satire only goes so far. Karen didn't laugh. She doubled down. I caught her one evening walking the docks with 2 of her compliance volunteers. They wore matching HOA polo shirts, like they were on some official patrol. Clipboards in hand, they squatted next to boats, scribbling notes about fenders, ropes, and paint. One even tried to photograph my fire extinguisher mounted in the cabin window. I leaned against the pier rail, watching with amusement. "You guys starting a new navy," I called out. Karen snapped her head around, eyes flashing. "This marina is part of our community. We have every right to ensure compliance with safety and aesthetics." I held up my Coast Guard documentation like a badge. "This says otherwise. HOA rules stop at the shoreline." Her lips curled into that tight, venomous smile I'd come to know too well. "We'll see about that." And that was the moment I knew she wasn't bluffing anymore. She wasn't satisfied with pamphlets or posts. She was planning something bigger, something that involved her precious keys. I didn't need Saul to tell me. I saw it in the way she fingered that key ring, the way she tapped it against her clipboard like a countdown. She was convinced she had authority, and she was itching to prove it. So I waited. Cameras, armed sensors, set, paperwork ready. Karen thought she was a paper tiger with claws made of bylaws. But she was about to learn the hard way that paper burns fast when you bring it near real law, and I had a federal flame ready. It was a Saturday, the kind of day meant for nothing more than bait sunshine and forgetting the world. I was leaning against the counter of the marina's bait shop, jawing with Saul about the trout bite, when my phone buzzed. Not a text, not a call, the alert tone I'd set only for my boat's security system. Hatch opened. Motion detected. For a moment I thought maybe it was a glitch. Then another ping followed, companionway access. Unauthorized key attempt. My stomach dropped. I pulled up the live camera feed, and there she was, Karen herself, HOA, President Destroyer of Weekends, standing on my deck like she'd been crowned Admiral of the Lake. She wasn't alone. 2 of her loyal compliance volunteers hovered behind her clipboards at the ready, nodding like squires obeying their queen. Karen bent over my hatch, fumbling with a ring of jangling keys. "This one has to work," she muttered, voice sharp in the mic. "The HOA doesn't tolerate rogue vessels." Rogue vessels. She said it like my 30-foot cruiser was a pirate ship about to storm her precious cul-de-sac. I bolted out of the bait shop, my knee aching but adrenaline shoving me forward. Dock planks thudded beneath my boots as I stormed toward my slip. The lake shimmered calm and glassy, a cruel contrast to the storm brewing on my boat. Through the feed in my pocket, I heard her henchman mumble, "Karen, are we allowed to do this?" She snapped. "Of course we are. Safety first. His anchor rope isn't beige. That's a hazard. And look, he's got a cooler that doesn't match the dock decor. Unacceptable." I nearly laughed even as fury boiled inside me. Beige ropes, coolers. This was her crusade. But then came the scrape of metal. Her key twisted in the lock. The companionway latch resisted federal-grade steel, not some flimsy padlock, but the system registered the attempt. That was all it needed. A shrill, high-pitched alarm wailed from the boat, echoing across the marina like a klaxon. Seagulls, scattered boaters jerked their heads up, and Karen froze keys mid-twist. And then quietly, almost invisibly, my trap sprung. The DSC distress system pinged a coded alert across the maritime band. Not a mayday, not a hoax, just a sharp digital cry that flagged the Coast Guard's console and the County Lake Patrol at the same time. I reached the head of the dock just as neighbors started gathering. Phones came out. June, of course, front and center, live stream already rolling. "HOA, break-in. People," she narrated breathlessly. "Karen's at it again." Karen tried to recover her composure. She raised her chin, glaring at me like I was the intruder. "We are conducting a compliance inspection," she declared loudly, voice wobbling but still commanding. "This vessel is non-compliant, and therefore subject to HOA review." I barked a laugh that carried down the dock. "Karen, this isn't your pool deck. You have no jurisdiction here." But she doubled down, waving her clipboard like a sword. Your anchor line is a tripping hazard. Your fire extinguisher is not HOA approved. And this, she pointed dramatically at my teak trim, is an aesthetic violation. The crowd chuckled. Even some of her volunteers looked embarrassed. One whispered, "Maybe we should leave." She shot him a glare so sharp he wilted on the spot. No, we finished what we started. Then came the sound that changed everything, a low whoop 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 echo rolling across the lake. At first faint, then louder, stronger. My DSC alert had done its job. A county patrol boat cut across the cove, lights flashing siren, whooping in short bursts. And right behind it, sleek and powerful, a U.S. Coast Guard response boat roared into view. Karen's face drained of color. The neighbors gasped. Phones angled higher, capturing the scene as the vessels closed in water spraying up from their wakes. I crossed my arms, savoring the moment. Looks like the real inspectors are here. Karen fumbled her keys, nearly dropping them into the water. This is unnecessary," she stammered. "We were just checking safety equipment." The Coast Guard boat eased alongside crew standing tall in life vests and mirrored sunglasses. One of them, Petty Officer Ruiz, as I'd later learned, cupped his hands and shouted, "Whose vessel is this?" I raised my hand. "Mine." And she's breaking into it. Dozens of eyes, dozens of cameras, and now federal uniforms all locked on Karen. She sputtered, clipboard trembling. I'm the HOA president. I have the authority." But before she could finish, Ruiz's voice boomed across the marina. "Ma'am, you have no authority on a documented vessel. Step away. Now." And just like that, Karen's so-called master key lost its magic. Neighbors whispered, chuckled, some outright laughed. June's livestream comments poured in little hearts and laughing emojis flooding the screen. Karen stepped back, her face twisted between rage and fear. For the first time, the mighty HOA president looked small, cornered, and utterly powerless. And me, I just smiled, leaning against the pier post, letting the scene burn into memory. Because this wasn't just about a boat. This was about drawing the line and watching Karen stumble right over it, straight into the hands of people who actually had jurisdiction. If you've never seen a crowd of neighbors turn on a dime, you should have been there that afternoon. One moment, people were watching Karen jiggle keys like she was about to repossess a yacht. The next, they were whipping out phones, pointing, whispering, and laughing as the Coast Guard boat cut its engine alongside my slip. The uniformed crew moved with crisp efficiency, no wasted motions, no hesitation. Petty Officer Ruiz, the lead, stepped onto the dock-heavy boots, thudding against the planks. His sunglasses mirrored the scene, Karen stiff as aboard volunteers, sweating through their polo shirts, me standing there with my arms crossed and my grin wide enough to split my face. "Whose vessel is this?" Ruiz asked, voice steady-clipped official. I raised a hand. "Mine." 30-foot cruiser, documented vessel numbers on the hull. Ruiz nodded once. "And these individuals?" He turned his gaze on Karen, who puffed herself up like a cornered cat. "I am the HOA president," she declared, clipboard trembling in her hand. "We were performing a safety inspection. This boat has numerous violations. Ropes, fire extinguishers, paint colors. The community demands compliance." The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Then Ruiz said in a tone as flat as a hammer, "Ma'am, the HOA has no authority to board or inspect a federally documented vessel. What you've done is unlawful entry." Karen's jaw twitched. She held out her binder like a shield. "We have bylaws, community rules. The master key gives us access." Ruiz tilted his head, unimpressed. "The master key, who issued that?" Karen faltered. The board. We have rights." The second officer, a younger guy with a trimmed beard, barked a short laugh before catching himself. Ruiz shot him a look, then refocused on Karen. "Ma'am, let me be clear. You can't use homeowners association bylaws to override federal maritime law. This vessel is under Coast Guard jurisdiction, not your HOA." The crowd erupted in whispers. June, narrating on her phone, whispered dramatically, "She's toast. Oh, Karen's done." Karen's volunteers tried to fade into the background, clipboards dropping to their sides. One of them even stepped back so fast he nearly tripped into the water. But Karen, true to form, didn't know when to quit. She jabbed a finger at my boat, her voice rising an octave. "That vessel is dangerous. His anchor line could strangle a swimmer. His cooler is—" Ruiz raised a hand, silencing her. "Ma'am, tampering with safety equipment is a federal offense. You attempted to force entry on a documented vessel. That's not a violation of HOA bylaws, it's criminal trespass." Her face went pale. The crowd went silent again. All you could hear was the gentle slap of water against the hull and the gulls circling overhead. I decided it was time to add a little fuel to the fire. I pulled out my phone and hit play. On the screen, my security feed showed Karen fumbling with her keys, muttering about rogue vessels and non-compliant anchor ropes. The audio was crystal clear. The neighbors gasped. Some laughed outright. Karen's shoulders sagged as the evidence played for everyone, including the Coast Guard. Ruiz crossed his arms. "Sir," he said, turning to me, "do you wish to file a complaint?" I let the question hang for a moment. Everyone leaned in, waiting for my answer. Karen's eyes begged me silently, me the guy she'd been harassing for weeks, to show mercy. I smirked. "Oh, I'll be filing plenty of paperwork. But for now, I just want the record clear. The HOA doesn't own the lake, doesn't own this marina, and sure as hell doesn't own my boat." The crowd chuckled, some clapping softly. June whispered into her live stream, "That's going viral." Ruiz nodded. "Understood. We'll file an incident report. County Patrol will take your statement." He turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you and your volunteers need to step away. Immediately." Karen tried one last desperate pivot. "This is all a misunderstanding," she stammered. "We were only protecting the community. If something happened to this vessel, the HOA could be liable." Ruiz cut her off with a dry tone. "The only liability here is yours. Step away." And finally, mercifully she did. She dropped her key ring into her tote bag with a clatter, lowered her clipboard, and shuffled backward like a scolded schoolchild. The volunteers scattered faster than pigeons when the bread runs out. But the damage was done. The neighbors had seen it all. The Coast Guard had it documented. My cameras had every second recorded. For once, Karen wasn't in control. As the officers wrapped up, Ruiz turned back to me. "We'll need to take your footage and file the report. I'd also recommend contacting your insurance. There's evidence of tampering on your lock." I nodded. "Already planned on it. Thanks for showing up so fast." He cracked the faintest smile. "That distress ping of yours went straight through the system. Good thinking, linking it up." Karen's head snapped up. "Wait, you set this up?" I grinned. "Let's just say I believe in being prepared." Her mouth opened, then closed again like a fish gasping for air. She had nothing left. The Coast Guard officers departed patrol boat, escorting them across the shimmering water. The crowd lingered, buzzing, gossiping, laughing. Karen hurried off down the dock, shoulders hunched, muttering about misunderstandings and legal reviews. But her authority, the iron grip she'd held over the neighborhood, was cracked wide open. And me, I stayed behind on the deck of my boat, running a hand along the polished teak, breathing in the sharp scent of lake air. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. Karen had tried her master key, but it was the Coast Guard who had the real power. And she knew it. Everyone knew it. You'd think after the Coast Guard spelled it out in bold letters, Karen would have slinked back to her cul-de-sac throne and licked her wounds. But Karen wasn't wired for humility. The woman could fall flat on her face in front of a stadium crowd and still insist she meant to do it. So as the officers gathered statements, she tried spinning the story, twisting words, twisting facts, even twisting herself into knots, to avoid admitting what we all saw with our own eyes. "Those keys," she told Ruiz, waving them like a magician revealing a trick, "are for emergencies. If there had been a fire or a gas leak or, heaven forbid, a drowning, the HOA would have been negligent not to act. We were simply proactive." Ruiz raised an eyebrow. "Proactive? You were caught attempting to unlock a hatch that doesn't belong to you." Her voice cracked just slightly. "Well, maybe the marina management told us we could." And that's when Saul, leaning casually against the pier post, decided to speak. His tone was flat, almost bored, like he'd been waiting all week for this moment. "Lady, the marina contract is with the county. I manage this dock. You have zero authority here. I never gave you keys. You've been jiggling at locks you don't own, and now everyone's seen it." The crowd snickered. Phones stayed up. June whispered, "Ooh, she's cornered now," into her mic, her live stream comments flying with popcorn emojis and laughing faces. Karen's face flushed crimson, but she tried again. But the bylaws." That was my cue. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a neat little folder tabbed and color-coded. I'd been keeping it for weeks, building my case like a chess player stacking pawns. I handed it straight to Ruiz. "Here's every HOA notice she sent me," I said. "Every email, every pamphlet, every fake inspection warning. And here's my Coast Guard documentation proving this vessel falls under federal jurisdiction. Not one of her so-called bylaws touches this slip." Ruiz flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "You've been keeping good records," he said finally. I nodded. "Experience taught me when someone like Karen comes knocking, you don't just slam the door. You document, you record, and you wait. Eventually, they trip themselves. Karen sputtered. "This is harassment. He's setting me up." I smiled. "Funny thing, Karen, you're half right. I did set something up." The crowd leaned in. Even Ruiz paused. I tapped the DSC alarm panel mounted near the hatch. "That little ping you heard earlier, I linked my boat's security system with the Coast Guard distress channel. I'm auxiliary. We train for this stuff. I knew if anyone tampered with my vessel, the system would alert the right people, which is why they showed up so fast." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "He's Coast Guard." I clarified with a grin, "Auxiliary, not active duty. But it comes with certain perks, like knowing exactly what laws apply out here." June nearly dropped her phone in excitement. "Oh, this is gold. HOA Karen breaks into a Coast Guard auxiliary's boat. You can't make this up." Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut again. Her eyes darted around looking for an ally, but her volunteers had suddenly developed deep interest in their shoelaces. Ruiz nodded slowly. "That explains it. And it confirms something else you had the foresight to prepare. Smart move." He turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, you need to understand, tampering with federally documented vessels isn't just bad manners. It's potentially a federal offense. Lock safety gear, hatches, those are protected. And now we've got video eyewitnesses and a recorded alert." Karen stammered. But the boundaries. The marina is part of the neighborhood." Saul barked a laugh. "The marina is leased by the county. I've told you a dozen times. You never listened. Now look." Her face twisted. She looked like she might cry, but pride kept the tears from falling. Instead, she puffed out her chest again, desperate to salvage a shred of power. "This is all confusing. We were acting in good faith. Surely the HOA can't be punished for a simple misunderstanding." I leaned forward, my voice low, but cutting enough for everyone to hear. "Karen, you weren't confused. You were arrogant. You thought your bylaws trumped the law of the land. But here's the truth out here. You're just another trespasser. And you've been caught." The crowd roared with laughter. Even Ruiz's partner cracked a grin. June's livestream comments exploded. "Get her Coast Guard. Karen versus federal law round 1. Popcorn sales just spiked." Ruiz didn't laugh. He was all business. "Here's how this goes. We'll file the incident report. County officers will review for charges. At minimum, you'll be looking at trespass and tampering. At maximum, well, you don't want to know." Karen's hands shook. She stuffed her keys into her bag and tried to glare at me, but the fire in her eyes had been replaced with something else, fear. For the first time since moving to that neighborhood, I felt the scales tip. The HOA wasn't untouchable. Karen wasn't invincible. She was human, vulnerable, and finally accountable. And best of all, I hadn't laid a finger on her. She'd walked straight into her own trap. I stood there, soaking in the moment, the lake breeze cool against my face. I thought about every petty fine, every threat, every sleepless night of frustration. And then I thought about how sweet it felt to watch the mighty HOA president shrink under the weight of real authority. She thought her master key could open any door. But today, it had unlocked only one thing: her downfall. If you think Karen went home, poured herself a stiff drink, and reconsidered her life choices, then you don't know Karen. The woman didn't retreat, she reloaded. By the very next evening, there was an emergency HOA board meeting notice plastered on every mailbox, inbox, and bulletin board in the neighborhood. I showed up not because I had to, but because I wanted to watch the fireworks. The clubhouse was packed, the air thick with tension. On one side of the room sat Karen's loyalists, the people who thought rulebooks were sacred scripture. On the other sat everyone else, neighbors tired of being fined for mailbox paint or for leaving their trash bins out an hour too long. Karen stood at the front, her posture rigid, clipboard clutched like a security blanket. "Fellow homeowners," she began, voice still commanding despite the cracks. "Yesterday's incident was a misunderstanding, a simple matter of jurisdiction that has been blown out of proportion. The HOA acted in the interest of safety and community values." The murmurs started immediately. Someone snorted. Someone else muttered, "Yeah, right." From the back, June raised her phone. "Karen," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, 10,000 people watched you try to break into a boat that didn't belong to you. We all saw it. Don't call that a misunderstanding." The room erupted, half with laughter, half with outrage. Karen's face flushed crimson, but she pressed on. "Our intent was never malicious. However, it is my duty to protect property values and ensure safety." By jiggling locks like a burglar, Saul barked from his seat near the door. The man rarely raised his voice, but when he did it, landed like a gavel. "You crossed into county-leased property and tampered with a federally documented vessel. That's not safety, that's liability. The word liability hung in the air like smoke. Because here's the thing, insurance companies don't care about HOA pride. They care about risk. And Karen had just painted a giant bullseye on the entire neighborhood. Sure enough, 2 days later, notices went out. The HOA's insurer was reviewing coverage after an incident involving unauthorized entry and potential criminal activity. Translation premiums were about to skyrocket, and everyone would be paying for Karen's little adventure. Neighbors lost it. The same people who used to nod along with her edicts now glared at her in the grocery store. Complaints piled up in the group chat. Someone started a recall petition. The HOA board split into factions, half scrambling to protect Karen, the other half desperate to cut her loose before the entire ship sank. Meanwhile, I played my own game of chess. I drafted a civil demand letter, polite but sharp enough to draw blood. It outlined damages, the cost to replace my lock, the stress and disruption, the potential liability exposure. Attached were photos, video stills, and even the Coast Guard incident number. I CC'd the HOA's legal counsel and their insurance provider just to twist the knife. Within a week I got a response. The insurance adjuster wanted a statement, the HOA's lawyer wanted to mediate, and Karen, she wanted me gone. She fired off a desperate email accusing me of weaponizing federal resources against a community volunteer. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my deck chair. It wasn't just about me anymore. Word spread. Other neighbors came forward with their own stories, Karen opening gates without permission, snooping in garages during inspections, even photographing people's backyards. She wasn't a president, she was a petty dictator, and now her empire was cracking. But the best part, she couldn't spin this one. June's live stream had gone viral locally. News outlets picked it up. Headlines read, HOA president accused of boat break-in, Coast Guard called. The clip of Ruiz telling her you have no authority on a documented vessel was replayed on loop, complete with remixes and memes. Someone even edited it into a sea shanty. For the first time, Karen wasn't feared. She was ridiculed. And ridicule is poison to a tyrant. Still, I had decisions to make. Did I push for criminal charges? Did I accept mediation? Did I let her twist in the wind? Or did I drop the hammer? My wife reminded me of something. Winning isn't just about payback. It's about making sure she can't hurt anyone else. She was right. So I made my terms clear, public accountability. If the HOA wanted this settled quietly, they'd have to cough up for damages, issue a written apology, and strip Karen of her precious dock committee role. No more keys, no more clipboards. At the next board meeting, the room was electric. Neighbors demanded answers. Karen tried one last grandstand ranting about outsiders undermining the community, but it was too late. The board voted 4-3 to accept my terms. Karen's face when they announced it was priceless jaw, slack eyes, glassy knuckles, white against her clipboard. She looked like someone had just repossessed her crown. The motion passed. She was out. I walked home that night under the glow of street lamps, the air crisp with lake breeze. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages, thank yous, congratulations memes of Karen sinking on a cartoon ship. For once, the HOA wasn't looming over me. Karen wasn't looming over anyone. But I knew her story wasn't quite finished. People like her don't go quietly, they cling to scraps of power like a drowning sailor clutching driftwood. And I was ready for the final round. The end didn't come with a bang, it came with paperwork, which ironically is Karen's native language. After weeks of wrangling with lawyers, insurance reps, and neighbors foaming at the mouth over rising premiums, the HOA caved. They invited me to a mediation session at the clubhouse. I went in wearing my ball-cap work boots and the smuggest smile I could muster. Across the table sat the HOA's counsel, a gray-haired man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Next to him, 3 board members shuffled nervously. And at the far end, Karen sat stiff-backed, clutching a legal pad like she was ready to filibuster her way back into power. The attorney cleared his throat. Mr. Miller, the association, is prepared to resolve this matter amicably. We are offering full reimbursement for damages to your vessel, including lock replacement plus reasonable legal costs. I leaned back, crossing my arms. That's a start, but it's not enough. Karen snapped. How dare you? I cut her off. This isn't just about me. It's about every neighbor you've bullied, fined, and harassed. So here are my terms, written apology signed by the board, acknowledging you had no authority at the marina. Coverage of damages and fees, and effective immediately, Karen steps down from any role involving the docks. No more keys, no more clipboards. The board shifted uncomfortably. Karen sputtered. That's outrageous. I was protecting the community. Saul, who'd been invited as a witness, leaned forward. "Lady, you almost cost the community its insurance. Outrageous is you trying to play sheriff on county property." The lawyer sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and said the words I'd been waiting for: "We accept." Karen's pen clattered to the table. She stared at the board members like they'd stabbed her in the back. But the truth was, they were finally doing what they should have done years ago, cutting her loose before she dragged them all down. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox, official, notarized, complete with the HOA's crest at the top. It apologized for the overreach of authority, confirmed reimbursement, and announced Karen's removal from dock-related committees. It was bureaucratic poetry. But the best part wasn't the letter. It was the new sign that went up at the marina, courtesy of Saul. "Notice: this marina is county property. Unauthorized inspections by HOA are prohibited. Violators may face trespass charges." Neighbors cheered. Some even posed for photos next to it, sending me copies with winking emojis. Karen, meanwhile, retreated. She still lurked around the cul-de-sac, muttering about witch hunts, but the fire was gone. People didn't flinch when she walked by anymore. They rolled their eyes, sometimes laughed outright. Her reign was broken. One evening, I took my cruiser out for a slow ride across the lake. The sun dipped low, painting the water in molten gold. The air was cool, crisp-free. I leaned back at the helm, listening to the gentle churn of the engine, and thought about how far this ridiculous battle had come. Karen had tried her master key. She thought she could bully her way onto my deck, extend her reach beyond fences and lawns all the way to the open water. But the lake didn't bow to HOA bylaws. And when she forced the issue, the Coast Guard made sure she learned that lesson the hard way. As I idled back into the slip, I saw her on the boardwalk, clutching her tote bag. Our eyes met for a second. She didn't glare, she didn't sneer, she just looked down, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her mail. And for the first time since moving here, I felt no anger, just pity. She had built her kingdom on fear and paper rules. But the moment real law stepped in, her power dissolved like cheap ink in the rain. I tied off my lines, took a deep breath of the lake air, and smiled. The HOA didn't own me. Karen didn't own me. Out here, freedom was mine. At the end of it all, I realized this story wasn't just about a boat or a broken lock. It was about boundaries, the ones written into law and the ones we set for ourselves. People like Karen thrive on fear, intimidation, and the hope that nobody will push back. They wield rules like weapons, but rules without truth and authority are nothing more than paper tigers. Standing your ground isn't always about shouting louder or swinging harder. Sometimes it's about preparation, keeping records, knowing your rights, and waiting for the moment when arrogance exposes itself. When Karen rattled those keys, she didn't just try to open my hatch. She opened the door to her own downfall. And isn't that life? Bullies, whether in neighborhoods or boardrooms, count on silence. The moment you stand firm with facts, with allies, with the law on your side, they crumble. So if you're watching this, remember your peace, your home, your sanctuary, it's worth protecting. Don't let fear keep you quiet. And when you set your boundaries, set them like steel. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or a Karen who thought they had more power than they did? Drop your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this ride, hit subscribe and join us for more HOA tales that prove one thing: sometimes the best revenge is simply standing your ground.